In Chapter 12, we discuss organizing your speech. This is part one. Okay, so if you look in your textbook on page 246, they talk about this student who is going to give a persuasive speech about Adderall. So for our purposes, let's say that the intent of this speech, the goal statement is to persuade college students not to take Adderall without a prescription. So the first thing you need to do to develop the body is identify the main points. You in the speech, 6 to 8 minutes, I think, is the time limit. You don't have time for more than a maximum of 4 main points. 3 is probably a good number if you stick to that. So you have 3 main points: understanding the nature and purpose of Adderall as a prescription drug, its growing popularity among college students, and then problems with using Adderall as a study aid. So for each one of these main points, you identify some subpoints, some information to share. So you need to make sure that the relationship between each main point and the speech goal is clearly specified. And you want to make sure that the main points are parallel in structure. So what do we mean by that? Take a look at page 248 in your textbook, top of the page. Parallel structure means the main points all follow the same structural pattern. So it's not a requirement, but if you use the same structural pattern, it will make it easier for your audience to follow along. Okay, you need to then select a main point pattern. If you choose to use time order, that might be that you share information in chronological order. A narrative order really is where you use stories to relay your message. Topical order is where you arrange the main points using some kind of logical relationship among them. So the main points can go from general to specific or least to most important, something like that. Logical reasons order structures the main points according to the reasons for accepting the thesis as desirable or true. So logical reasons order is usually used in a persuasive speech. So that's the one you really need to focus on. And that's covered on page 249 in your textbook. On the prior slide, where we had the 3 main points about Adderall usage, it was like, well, let's talk about what Adderall is, then why it is prescribed, and why students are using it without a prescription, and then what the benefits are, benefit myths are, and what the risks are. So it all follows in a logical order. That's probably what you want to do for your persuasive speech. Okay, now let's talk about the thesis statement. So in chapter 11, we talked about writing a specific goal statement. Now we're going to expand on that and write a thesis statement. Hopefully you watched my short video on writing a specific goal statement. So here the example is, the goal, you want to persuade your audience. The specific goal is to persuade parents to limit the time their children spend viewing television. So you're trying to get parents to limit their children's time in front of the TV. Now your thesis statement is, parents should limit the time their children spend viewing television because heavy television viewing desensitizes children to violence and increases violent tendencies in children. So in your thesis statement, you want to make sure that you have the word should. parents should limit the time their children spend viewing television. And then why? Well, because heavy television viewing desensitizes children to violence and increases violent tendencies in children. So that's kind of a point preview, how you're going to persuade. And those are reasons why you're going to persuade. So when you develop the outline, you've got your main points and your subpoints and supporting material, and then the listener relevance links. So a listener relevance link is really just a bit of information that directs the listener back to the main point and alerts the listeners to why the main point is relevant to them. Now, as I mentioned before, you want to limit your speech to 2, 3, or 4 main points. And I would say for this speech, 3 should be the maximum. And your book explains that the difference between doing a 6 to 8 minute speech and a 20-minute speech isn't the number of points necessarily, it's how detailed you get with your subpoints. But 4 main points would be a lot for a 6 to 8 minute speech. So maximum of 3. 3 is a good rule of thumb for this. You need at least 2 subpoints to support each main point. And then if you support any subpoints with a subpoint, you have to have at least 2 subpoints. So this looks a little confusing, but if you take a look at the speech outline template that I have on Blackboard, I think that'll become self-explanatory for you. So you want to have 3 main points and at least 2 subpoints for each of your main points. And if you have subpoints, subpoints, you need to have at least 2 for each subpoint. Okay, you want to create transitions in your speech. It makes it easier for the listener to follow along and understand kind of your train of thinking. Okay, a section transition is a sentence that really shows the relationship between major parts of the speech. Section transitions are what hold and link, what holds your speech together, what links your speech, the main points of your speech. A signpost is just a short word or a phrase that, again, helps the audience understand. The signposts might be, I have 3 things to share with you today about why Adderall should not be used by college students without a prescription. And those 3 things are number 1, number 2, number 3. Those are the signposts that you can use. You might also say things like, well, and to illustrate this point, here's a story, whatever. Again, the signposts just help the audience understand where you're going with your speech. And that brings us to the end of part 1 for chapter 12.